Ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed, good morning and welcome to this side event of the 23rd EAC Ordinary Summit. My name is Victoria Rubadiri and I'm a broadcast journalist from Nairobi, Kenya. I want to profusely apologize for our late start and also thank you for your patience as we got ourselves together this morning. Allow me to make a few housekeeping items. We have designated seating for some of our VIP guests with us this morning. To my right or stage left, we've designated seating for our keynote speakers and panelists. So the first two rows to my right has been designated for keynote speakers and panelists as well. At the center, designated seating for our honorable ministers of environment and other ministers joining us for this session as well. And to my left is designated seating for the diplomatic community as well as business community. Other participants are welcome to seat. It is free seating for this ceremony. Once again, the theme, as you can see, is enhancing climate resilience for food security and environmental sustainability in the East African region. And we'll try to unpack that a bit more in sub-thematic areas. And we'll be looking at climate resilient agriculture, as well as environmental sustainability and natural resource management. And lastly, we'll be looking at climate financing and resource mobilization. Once we've done all our speeches and interventions from those present, we will then present the climate change governance and EAC position towards COP28. At this juncture, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to begin our introductory and welcome remarks, where we'll set the context for this morning and the conversations that we'll be having a bit later on. Our first speaker for this segment is the Deputy Secretary General for the East African Community, Andrea Arik Maloueth. Can we give him a hearty round of applause as he makes his way up on stage to address the gathering? Wonderful. I believe he is still on his way. in the region. Another very important one is water resource management and conservation for climate change adaptation. Also joining the conversation, we'll be hearing from Innocent Kabenga from IUCN, and he'll be covering community-based initiatives and best practices for building climate resilience. And probably another and very important topic under this segment is renewable energy and low carbon technologies. And this will give you a sense of where the EAC joint position is headed in consolidating efforts when it comes to climate change and ensuring food security. Ladies and gentlemen, a hearty round of applause for the EAC DSG, Andrea Arik Malouet.
Okay, that's what fine. Honorable Ministers and Cabinet Secretary, Honorable Secretary General, hello.
So there is a deliberate effort intended to take infrastructure as a strategic investment, but also to make sure that we invest in it because it becomes the lifeline of economic growth.
November 1999, at the Sheikh Amri Abeid Stadium in Arusha, the presidents of the Republic of Kenya, Uganda, and the United Republic of Tanzania signed the treaty for the establishment of the East African Community. And on 7th July 2000, the treaty came into force. The republics of Burundi, Rwanda, and South Sudan were later admitted as new members of the community, increasing the membership from the original 3 to 6 partner states. The bloc is home to an estimated population of 177 million and a combined annual GDP of $193 billion as at the year 2019. The founders of the East African Community envisioned a region that would grow to a prosperous, competitive, secure, stable, and politically united community. 20 years later, true to their dreams and aspirations, East African Community has made significant gains towards integration, widening and deepening cooperation among the partner states in various key spheres for their mutual benefit, thanks to the strong and dynamic leadership being provided by the Summit of the Heads of State. Today, East African Community is the fastest growing regional economic bloc in Africa. With an expansive market, a hardworking and youthful population, enormous resources, including productive land, a vibrant tourism sector, rapid industrialization, an emerging oil and gas sector, precious minerals, and an attractive environment for investment.
We engage based on 4 pillars of regional integration. The first pillar is customs union, the second one is a common market protocol, monetary union, and of course political federation. But looking at the very specific issues in terms of why it is stated to be one of the fastest growing. One is because of the resources that we have in the community in East Africa, natural resources, but also because of the fact that the economies of the East African community.
Over the years, East African Community has continued to improve facilitation of movement of persons as well as goods and services across the region. A total of 17 key priority infrastructure projects in the areas of transport, cross-border operations, energy, and ICT aimed at deepening integration have been identified out of an approved set of
required investment to implement these projects was about $78 billion for the next 10 years and beyond.
I see this as a deliberate and strategic effort by the heads of states to make East Africa, within East Africa, partnerships within East Africa, very connected, interconnected, but also East Africa very much connected to the rest of the world. And the idea is that people should be able to move from wherever they are conveniently and reach their next destination with ease. You've seen in parts of other parts of the world where, for example, railway network is so convenient. You live in one country, you work in the other, and because of the convenience of the networks, the railway networks, you're able to move. So I would want to see a situation in the future where somebody should be able to work in Arusha, but you sleep in the evening in Dar es Salaam or in Nairobi, and you come in the morning to work. And that is possible if we continue committing ourselves towards connectivity.
In support of the EAC trade agenda, a key priority has been modernization and expansion of key East African coastal ports of Mombasa and Dar es Salaam, where 90% of international trade volumes are transacted. In return, the efforts of reclaiming acres of sea area to build new berths, container loading yards, and new terminals altogether are playing a significant role in reducing the overall cost of doing business in the region and growth of cargo volumes.
By 2012, Dar es Salaam port could only manage to handle 13 million tons a year, and that is stored capacity by then. But within 1 decade, the modernization and expansion of Dar es Salaam port, for instance, has enabled it to go to the capacity of handling 30 million tons which is over 130% increase within one decade, which is, I'm sure, one of the significant records across the globe. We didn't have a Roro terminal, which has just been recently completed.
Mr. Prosper Dodiko. As well as the diplomatic corps with us today, Excellencies, development partners, members of the Fourth Estate, once again, good morning. We'd like to call the room to order. And before we begin, one more announcement. Those of you who require translation services, you will see the kits right in front of you with the headphones, and the channels are as follows: English, channel 1, French, channel 2, and Kiswahili, channel 3. Once again, English, channel 1, French, channel 2, and Kiswahili, channel 3. Fantastic. At this juncture, ladies and gentlemen, your excellencies, allow me to invite a critical voice in this conversation of climate change and food security. We're going to hear from one of our younger participants, a youth climate change ambassador. Her name is Sharon Ringo. Sharon, kindly make your way up, and I'll also request for the other youth ambassadors from partner states present, come up to encourage her and give her some support. Sharon Ringo, the floor is yours. We know how critical it is to hear from the youth. Africa is a young continent, and they essentially will be carrying forward the climate action plans that we'll have in here. Sharon, come on up, don't be shy. This is your moment. Can we give her a round of applause as she makes her way up? Just to give her some support. And other youth ambassadors from the partner states, come up as well on stage as we hear from you. Wonderful, Sharon. The floor is yours.
Good morning. My name is Sharon Ngomoro, Trade and Tourism Ambassador for the East African Community. I'm 13 years old. I study in Braeburn International School. I am a founder for my foundation, Sharon Ngo Foundation. In my foundation, we have 3 main themes: climate action, environmental justice, and sustainable tourism. In my foundation, we have a goal to plant 10 million trees in the next 5 years, and so far we've already planted over 48,000 trees. In my foundation, we appoint ambassadors, and so far we've appointed 56 ambassadors globally. Let me start my speech. Honorable Secretary General of the East African Community, honorable ministers present, honorable ambassadors from different countries, honorable regional commissioner of our hosting city, governments, private leaders, and their dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. I'm so grateful for this wonderful opportunity to speak to you today. In the midst of unprecedented challenges from climate change, population growth, economic downturn, and the Russia-Ukraine crisis, global food security is now at crossroads. It is surely an emergency state that requires immediate and transformative action to save the world from collapsing. We, the children and youth, we are the most vulnerable, and we're really scared. Our call to our leaders, parents, and guardians meeting for this summit, the hope of our future lies in your discussion, actions, and decision you make now and in the future. Our cry from the wilderness, unlocking the political barriers, difficult policies, and increased financial commitments and innovations in our mother continent, Africa, to feed the world. A child died in Somalia, Congo, Haiti, India, and other parts of the world because of hunger is a denial responsibility of the parents and guardians around the world. You must not allow food to kill us. We need life. We need food to live. You have that responsibility to assure livelihood. You must continue thinking together, planning together, working together towards achieving productive, nutritious, inclusive, resilient, transformative, and sustainable food systems in Africa for the benefit to the world and future generations. The summit should seek to explore the pathways and actions needed to accelerate this process and steer the continent toward food system transformation under the theme Recover, Regenerate, Act, Africa's Solutions to Food Systems Transformation. We wish you, our leaders, a great and successful summit. This summit that will provide a platform to reflect on the coordinated, large-scale, and productive actions that will guarantee life for humankind. We as the children and youth have confidence in your leadership. I was discussing with the Minister of Agriculture, Tanzania. We agreed that without food security and economic well-being in the rural areas, climate challenge will always exist. Therefore, we must first find the means to enable the rural community to have food security and economic well-being by providing them with access to water through boreholes. This will stop them from cutting down trees and reduce climate crisis. Climate change is real. We must act now. Lastly, please join me as I say Idumu. Please say Jumuiya yetu. Idumu. Idumu. God bless Tanzania, God bless East Africa, and God bless the whole entire world. My name is Sharon Ngomoro, Trade and Tourism Ambassador for the East African Community and climate activist. Thank you.
Fantastic. One more round of applause for Sharon and the other youth climate ambassadors from our partner states. And these are our future. They will be carrying the mantle and the climate action plan. Photographers, if we can capture this moment, this is the future that will be carrying the EAC agenda forward and beyond COP28. As I mentioned earlier, 60% of Africa's population is under the age of 25. These young men and women are the ones we'll be counting on to carry forth the agenda. And I'm sure they have a word or two to share. Go ahead, sir. Introduce yourself.
My name is Jackson Hetawahidzi. I am from Burundi. I am the Deputy EAC Youth Ambassador.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Esther Wambui Gitao, and I'm the Deputy Youth Ambassador. Yes, EAC Kenya.
My name is Ketia Basunima. I am Youth Ambassador from EAC in DRC. Sorry, I'm French speaker.
So, good morning, everyone. I'm Edgar Mtungisa. I'm the EAC Youth Ambassador to Uganda.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Ayema Beklang. I am the East African Community Deputy Youth Ambassador to South Sudan. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mutaka Masara from the Republic of Rwanda. I'm here to also give justice to the climate, as we're here to also represent and also sensitize the other youth, because the world is also at a risk of facing more challenges and people are not able to realize that. So we're here to also strengthen the policies that have been made as we also sensitize other youth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Stephen Martin Edoro from the Republic of Uganda. I am the technical advisor to the Youth Ambassadors platform, and I also extend apologies and greetings from the Youth Ambassador to Tanzania, whose travel was delayed but will be joining us later today. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. You may take your seats. One last round of applause for our youth climate ambassadors from our partner states in the East African community. We are certainly in a safe pair of hands. Now, ladies and gentlemen, your excellencies, we'd like to move into our segment of welcoming remarks and introductory speeches. I'd like to invite our first speaker, Deputy Secretary General for the EAC, Andrea Arik Maloueth. Can we give him a hearty round of applause as he comes to address the gathering? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Director of Ceremony. In the interest of time, I'll go straight to my welcoming remarks. It is my distinct honor and privilege to welcome you all to the Ministerial Session of High-Level Forum on Climate Change and Food Security in East Africa region. As Deputy Secretary General overseeing infrastructure, productive, social, and political sectors, I take keen interest in critical matters which relate to climate change and food security, pivotal to issues that demand our collective attention and concerted action. The challenges we face today are profound and multifaceted, as the impacts of climate change is affecting across all our communities, not only the environment, but also the landscape. I wish to emphasize that our foundation and our social economic structure is also affected. The East Africa community as a regional bloc stand at the forefront of these challenges with an undeniable imperative to address climate change's far-reaching consequences on our food systems, agriculture practices, and overall sustainable development. The ministerial session serves as a critical platform for high-level dialogue, collaboration, and strategic planning. Our shared commitment to fostering resilience, mitigating the impact of climate change, and ensuring food security is not just a moral imperative, but a strategic necessity for sustainable development of our region. As we engage in substantive discussion over the course of this forum, I would encourage all the participants to leverage their expertise, experiences, and innovative solutions. Let us explore synergies, identify opportunities, and forge partnerships that will empower our nations to navigate the challenges posed by climate change and ensure the well-being of our citizens. In conclusion, I extend my sincere gratitude to each one of you for your dedication to this critical cause. Together, we can turn the tide on the impacts of climate change, enhance food security, and create resilient future for East Africa community. May our deliberations be fruitful, and may our collective effort pave the way for sustainable and secure tomorrow. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary General. One more round of applause for him as he takes his seat. And indeed, as he said, it takes a collaborative effort to turn the tide on climate change. And one of the critical partners in this process are development partners. Our next speaker is the German ambassador to the United Republic of Tanzania and EAC, His Excellency Thomas ter Stegen. A round of applause for him as he makes his way up.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is with great honor and privilege for me to address, on behalf of the German government, this distinguished conference on climate change and food security. Climate change is increasingly showing its effect in the Eastern African region. Mitigation of and adaptation to these effects requires joint and concerted action at national, regional, and international levels in order to adequately respond and preserve our planet for our future generations. The latest reports of the UNFCCC Secretariat and other scientific teams clearly indicate that the harmful emissions of greenhouse gases are still on the rise instead of declining, as foreseen under the 1.5 degrees Celsius target scenario agreed upon under the 2015 Paris Declaration. Collectively, we need to act in line with our common agreements to tackle these complex challenges. Regional economic communities like the EAC have an important role to play. Ladies and gentlemen, turning to the global challenge of our time, climate change, the German government remains resolute in its position towards COP28 and beyond. We understand the urgency to act, and we are therefore committed to the goals outlined in the international climate agreements. In this journey, we extended our support to the EAC Secretariat in 2022 and 2023 by providing technical assistance to the Secretariat and 7 partner states in formulating a unified and informed position for COP28. Following your proceedings during the EAC Summit today and tomorrow, we will further support the EAC presentation at COP28 Dubai. We remain ready to continue providing resources, technical expertise, and knowledge sharing to facilitate well-informed decision-making. Ladies and gentlemen, we recognize that climate change poses significant challenges to agriculture in East Africa, a region heavily reliant on rain-fed agriculture for food security, livelihoods, and economic development. Rising temperatures, unpredictable weather patterns, and changing precipitation levels are significantly impacting crop yields, livestock production, and food security. Together with other bilateral and multilateral development partners, we are providing support to promote regenerative and smart agricultural value chains, reducing the use of water and other inputs, preventing land degradation and deforestation, protecting and improving soil, protecting the environment and biodiversity, building climate resilience and efficient water resource management, while making farming more productive and profitable. Our commitment also extends to specialized organizations of EAC, like the Lake Victoria Basin Commission, through initiatives facilitated by German government institutions. Through sustainable development projects, environmental protection efforts, and community-empowered initiatives, and a new focus on nature-based solutions, we aim to make a tangible difference and appreciate that the LVBC is driving the climate adaptation in the biodiversity hotspot of Lake Victoria. Ladies and gentlemen, yesterday we have celebrated 25 years of EAC German cooperation. Let me reiterate my government's commitment toward an enduring partnership with the EAC and convey unwavering optimism. Together, through refined strategies and innovations, we pave the way for a resilient and sustainable future for people in the East Africa region. Thank you for your attention.
One more round of applause for His Excellency, the German Ambassador to Tanzania. Thank you so much for your remarks. And indeed, climate change is the global challenge of our time. So how are we using this opportunity to make a tangible difference in our communities? Our next speaker is the EAC's Secretary General, Honorable Dr. Peter Maduki, to now address the gathering. Can we give him a hearty round of applause as he makes his way up? Thank you so much, Honorable. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Victoria, and good morning, honorable ministers. Am I audible? Ministers and our guests, excellencies, ambassadors, and I want to thank you. I want to thank you most sincerely for creating time. Just confirm whether it's okay. Is it okay? Okay. So I want to thank you very much, and honorable ministers, for creating time to come, and your excellencies, ambassadors, and our guests who are here with us this morning. Let me right from the outset take full responsibility of any hiccups that we could be facing in this. I'm sure it was not our intention, but I want to appreciate the technical team that are doing their best to ensure that we are properly facilitated so that we can communicate. But again, appreciate the warm reception accorded to our guests by the host country, United Republic of Tanzania. It is always a home for everyone away from your homes, and therefore welcoming you to this event of the East African community. Want to appreciate for creating time. I want to concur with Sharon. And Sharon is saying the way forward is that we must work together. We must act together so that we can resolve these issues of food security and climate instabilities. And climate change is not new. We've been talking about it. But for how long are we going to be talking about this? I think talking has become too much. What we need to do is action. And action is being forced to us by nature. We've been waiting for rains in the entire East Africa. Rains came late, but when they came, they're also causing, havoc in many parts of our region. And therefore now we are being told that we must do something together. Because if we don't do something together, it will be too late. And I think now, it's beyond now policymakers. We need to even involve even the lowest, so that, and that's why I'm very excited to see, even children are telling us we must do something. And this is how serious the issue is. And looking at the dimensions of food security, physical presence of food is one thing. But again, there are issues of economic issues. Because we may be food secure at the national, at the regional, at the international. But what about at the household level? And that's why also building capacity, economic capacities at that level is very important if you want to attain food security. And therefore, as ourselves, as East African community, we want to fully associate ourselves and building from the Africa Climate Summit that was hosted by the Republic of Kenya in September. And actually subsequently, food security systems hosted by United Republic of Tanzania, and the things that came out of it. And what our leaders are saying, it is the time we need to talk and handle food security. And this is so basic that every citizen of East Africa has a right to have access to food. And therefore, as we prepare to go to COP27, what is our position as East African community? What are we going to tell the world? Are we joining the rest of the world just for the sake of it? Or do we have an agenda? And I think it's very important that agenda of East Africa is known by the entire world. So that when you are engaging with us from outside, you get to know our interests as East Africa on food security, what we want. And therefore it's important we set that agenda here in this forum. I'm very happy that we'll be having panelists, experts to tell us what we need to do. And later in the afternoon, we'll be hosting our heads of states to also tell us what their position is. So that joint and collective action is so important, so that as we prepare to go to COP28, we have a position as East African community. And that's why we have invited you to come and to help us so that we come up with that position. And I want to thank all of you for creating time to come. Indeed, we need to act together. Let's look at all dimensions of food security. Let us now find out how do we ensure every East African, every citizen at the household level has access to food. And I think that is our responsibility as policymakers. Once that is achieved, there will be no need of this kind of forums. We will have now done a lot of justice to the world and to the people at the lowest level. And that's our responsibility. I'm happy that the youth, the young, are also getting involved. And so finally, private sector. What is your role? What is the role of private sector working closely with governments to ensure that every citizen has access to food? Because you may have food, adequate food in our silos, but if that food cannot reach the household, then it becomes a problem. And therefore, what is your role as private sector? How can you help us? How can we work together to ensure that we serve the people of East Africa by them accessing very basic need, and that is food. So ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you. Those are some of the things we need to address. Those are some of the things that our citizens would want to hear, and they want to get answers for that. I thank you very much for creating time to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much, EAC Secretary General, Honorable Dr. Peter Maduki, for your remarks. As you've said, enough talk, more action. We need to start setting the agenda. Now, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we'll hear the opening address by the Chair of the Sectoral Council of Environment and Natural Resources Management, the Minister for Environment from the Republic of Burundi, Prosper Dodiko. Can we give him a hearty round of applause as he makes his way up to address the gathering? Thank you so much, Honorable Minister. The floor is yours.
Mesdames, Messieurs, bonjour. Bonjour. Now I realize that the more person here present, they are the English speaker. As I am a French speaker, allow me to use my bad English. Yes? Honorable Ministers, Cabinet Secretary, Excellency Ambassador, EAC Secretary General, Permanent Secretary, Principal Secretaries, Member of Diplomatic Corps, Development Partners, Private Sector Representative, distinguished participants, all protocols observed, good morning. Allow me to thank our Almighty God to save us and allow to arrive here in this very beautiful city of Arusha, Tanzania. Allow me also to thank the United Republic of Tanzania for their warm hospitality from the airport to here. We feel as we are at home. We thank also the ministers of agriculture, environment, and other natural resources to attend this high level to talk about environmental and natural resources. These show us the importance they attach to this high level. As you know, the EAC 2050 vision emphasized the interconnection of food system, livelihood and environmental management, climate change, and we know that this climate change poses significant threats, evidenced by intensified extreme weather events resulting in food, water and energy insecurity, land degradation, and more. The regional climate vulnerability impacts assessment underscores vulnerability, notably in rain-fed agriculture and hydropower dependencies. As you know, we are here around four objectives. One is to foster collaboration among EAC partner states, regional bodies, and international partners for climate resilience, food security, and environmental sustainability. Two is a showcase innovative approach, best practice, and success stories in climate adaptation, mitigation, environmental sustainability, and sustainable agriculture within the EAC region. Three is to identify opportunities for private sector investment, research, and technology transfer to support climate-smart agriculture and sustainable environmental practice. And the last is to unveil the EAC region position towards UN Climate Change Conference COP28. As you may be informed, we need to achieve some result. And one is that the collaboration and the knowledge sharing among stakeholders within and beyond the EAC regional must be enhanced. Second, innovative technologies and practice for climate-smart agriculture, showcasing best practice and success stories must be highlighted. And three, funding opportunities by the private sector for research, technology transfer, and climate-smart agriculture promoting tangible action must be identified. And last, the EAC position at the COP28 with the shared expectation of EAC partner state for the conference outcomes must be presented and addressed. This is what we are looking for this high-level forum. And I wish you fruitful discussion to achieve our result. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Honorable Minister. One more round of applause for Honorable Prosper Dodiko, Minister for Environment from Burundi. And we have a little visitor who is trying to reclaim their ecosystem. Don't be alarmed. Now we're going to set some context for this segment of the program. The Africa Climate Summit took place in Nairobi back in September, and several outcomes were deliberated on and came out of that particular forum. We're going to hear an overview from the summit and some of the resolutions and their relevance and impact to the EAC region. And to give us that context is Dr. Pacifica Ogola, the Director for Climate Change Programs and Coordination at the Climate Change Directorate, which is a department of the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources in Kenya. Let's give Dr. Ogola a round of applause as she comes up to address us. Thank you, Daktari.
Yeah, thank you very much, Victoria. Excellency Ministers, colleagues, good morning. My name is Dr. Pacifica Ogola, the Director for Climate Change in Kenya. I'm here on behalf of my Cabinet Secretary, Honorable Roslinda Soipan Tuya, who would have wished to be here with us this morning, but could not because of other duties. I want to take this opportunity to thank the government of Tanzania for the warm welcome, and with the EAC Community Secretariat for the engagement that we've had in the run-up to previous Conference of Parties on climate change, and also on our general engagement on climate programs. As you're aware, Africa Climate Summit was held in Nairobi between the 4th and 6th of September, and Kenya hosted this summit under the auspices of the African Union Commission. And this is because in February last year, Kenya assumed the chair of the Committee of African Heads of States on Climate Change, CAHOSC, and with that comes the responsibility to ensure that the continent speaks with one voice in all environmental and climate multilateral agreements across the globe. Kenya already represented the continent in COP27 last year, and it's during that COP in Sharm el-Sheikh, which was dubbed the African COP, where His Excellency President William Ruto announced that he will be hosting the first ever Africa Climate Summit. And the reason why this was done is because it was felt that the heads of states have never met to discuss climate change. So the continent as a whole did not have that leadership at the very apex level to guide the technical negotiators in terms of the policy direction that we want as a continent, so that when we go there and we negotiate, representing the continent as Africa group of negotiators, we have a common voice that we are drawing from our heads of states and government. The summit, before the summit, we had several events. We presented the summit at the African Ministerial Environment Conference in Addis, where we had decisions and resolutions taken on the summit. So we'll be able to take this forward during the upcoming UNEA meeting. We had the Youth Assembly, the indigenous peoples, the CSOs, farmers, civil society. All these were pre-summit activities to make sure that no one was left behind and that we are gathering momentum for the summit. The summit was held jointly with the Africa Climate Week, which is a UNFCCC event, a regional event which is held in several regions. But this time it was held in Kenya on the margins of the summit. So the two events brought together about 30,000 participants representing over 130 countries. Why did we invite other countries? Because we felt that it's not enough for us to speak to ourselves. We need to identify our priorities, and we need to demonstrate what Africa can do for herself and for the world, instead of presenting herself as a climate change victim. And we also needed to present the opportunities that Africa has, and that these opportunities must be matched with capital and technology for us to take the necessary climate action that we all deserve. So the key message there was Africa is not poor. Africa is a very rich continent. How do we leverage on the resources that we have to make sure that we get the development that we have, and to make sure that this development is green? So the key theme message of the summit was driving a green growth agenda, not just for Africa, but for the world. And we had several heads of states, over 20 heads of states and governments from Africa and the rest of the world. And I'm happy to say that the region was well represented at heads of state level and ministerial level. The UNSG, the United Nations Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres participated in the meeting. We had ambassadors, technical officers, private sector, civil society organization, youth and children, so no one was left behind, including indigenous societies, farmers, women, and children. So after the deliberation on the summit, the main outcome document is called the African Leaders Nairobi Declaration on Climate Change and Call to Action. This document is available online in the African Union Commission Secretariat website. and it embodies the commitments and the call to action that the African leaders presented to the world, and it also demonstrates how Africa is getting ready for COP28, given that the COP28 is called the COP of Accountability, and it's the COP where the Global Stocktake report will be presented. The Global Stocktake report is just a report card showing how we have performed. Sorry, I think there's... Yeah, so it's just a report card of showing how the continent, the world has performed in climate action, and that report identified several gaps. And we are happy to say that the African Leaders Nairobi Declaration on Climate Change and Call to Action is showing how Africa is planning to contribute to closing those gaps, not just for herself, but also for the world. We also had a very strong outcome on a pathway to a new global financial architecture to make sure that we have a deal that includes at scale and fit for purpose. So the summit focused on the fact that most African countries are suffering from debt burden, at the same time as struggling to address the issue of climate change, and that the resources that are being mobilized are not adequate to respond to climate change. And therefore, there's need to have a new global financial framework that addresses these issues and makes sure that we're able to mobilize climate finance to scale and is fit for purpose. During the summit, we had investments commitments amounting to almost 26 billion worth of green deals across the continent and across sectors. But 26 billion is very relative because this is just the beginning. The summit was the beginning of a long-term process. And I say this because if, for example, the Kenya Nationally Determined Contribution, NDC alone, requires 62 billion US dollars to be implemented. And therefore, in terms of the entire continent, we are talking about trillions to get some action. So that's a baseline. So we still have a lot of work ahead, and we'll be mobilizing for green investments across the region to make sure that we have a pipeline that we can use to mobilize for resources. And we also had some announcements. There were presentations on tangible progress on ongoing major initiatives, which are already started. So those who are not left behind. We had meetings making presentations on the process. We also had over 400 side events, all encouraging greater ambition. We had high-level presidential segments and ministerial segments. And on the margins, we had the National Assembly segments, the judiciary, the academia. So Nairobi was a buzz of everybody talking about climate change, depending on their mandate. So Kenya made several commitments. A number of African countries also made commitment. But the most important commitment is that we took a strategy for 2050, which commits to reduce emissions to near net zero by 2050. We also launched our National Climate Change Action Plan, which is very, very ambitious. We had amended our Climate Change Act, which now includes carbon markets requirements. And we launched this to attract investment in the carbon market space. We are also leading one of the most successful locally led climate action programs called FLOCA, where we have climate actions coming from the village heads all the way to the sub-national level to the national level. We launched the new green hydrogen strategy and roadmap, and we are going to start working on that. And we also work closely with the Global Center on Adaptation and Africa Development Bank to launch what we are calling the Adaptation Compacts to make sure that all countries are planning for the adaptation and reviewing the national adaptation plan to make sure that they are in line with the adaptation and the climate threats that we face. In terms of what we did after the summit, on 20th of September, We presented the outcome of the summit to the United Nations Secretary General Climate Ambition Summit, which was in New York, and that was a good thing because for us, the UNSG, Mr. Antonio Guterres, had set very clear targets and expectations, and for us, with the Nairobi Declaration, we were able to respond to all those at the continental level and also at national level as a country. We had very clear targets and actions or plans that we are going to present. On 21st of September, we were able to present this outcome to the Committee of African Heads of States on Climate Change, called CAHOSC, on the margins of UNGA, because it's under the auspices of the African Union Commission and the AU, and therefore it was important for us that a decision is taken and that the CAHOSC meeting adopts the Nairobi Declaration and also adopts the Africa Position Paper, which we will use for the negotiations. And this was presented by the AGN chair, which is currently the Republic of Zambia. On 1st and 2nd of December in Dubai, as we go to COP, we once again expect to present the outcome of the African Nairobi Declaration and the Africa Climate Summit and link it to the Global Stocktake report to demonstrate what Africa is offering to do and to mobilize resources to secure the green investment plans that we have for the continent. And we are also going to make sure that by next year, February, during the African Union Assembly, that the decision is taken at the African Union to adopt a roadmap. We already have an implementation plan. We have a roadmap for post-summit, and the EAC countries are included in this roadmap. So moving forward, we'll be coming back to EACs at national level, EAC countries as member state level, to make sure that we have specific project pipeline from the community to take forward. And we intend to have a coordination mechanism, again, which we will share with the region, and this will be done through the African Union Commission through a note verbal. There are several thematic areas or priority areas of the summit, which will also be reaching out to member states, to the African Union member states, and also to the East African Commission member states to help us champion or to take leadership. For example, Kenya has taken leadership in the new climate finance architecture and the renewable energy pledge that will be launched, that was the commitment that were made in Nairobi, and the same that will be launched at COP28. So we expect to have our green investment plan, and we'll come back we'll come to present it to the East African community and also to the African Union Assembly in the year 2025. So, in summary, the Nairobi Declaration is aligned to the level of ambition that is required at the COP26, and it built momentum and strengthened Africa's position towards COP, and everybody is talking about it. And it also set very bold and ambitious vision for the continent. So the challenge we have is not to drop the vision, but to keep the momentum and make sure that we continue to make sure that we get the best investments and fair deals in a just and equitable manner for the continent. And we welcome any of the member states who want to engage directly, either with us through the Ministry of Environment, Climate Change and Forestry in Nairobi, or through the African Union Commission in the relevant department. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ogola, for reminding us of the criticality of having a common voice. And of course, the Africa Climate Summit provided the opportunity to do that. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, your excellencies, we are going to start off our first topic on climate resilient agriculture. And to give a keynote speech for this particular segment, allow me to invite Professor Claverie Tungara from the Sokoine University of Agriculture. He will set context for the conversation, and as he's doing that, I'd also like to invite the panelists on stage, Dr. Nancy Rapando from WWF Africa Food Future Leader, as well as Dr. Enoch Warinda, Executive Director for Agricultural Research in the East and Central Africa region. Kindly make your way up. Professor, the floor is yours as we set context for this first topic. Thank you.
sector is vulnerable. We have normally general statements explaining the status of agriculture. Crop, animals, maybe irrigation scheme, how they are affected, but specifically which weather phenomena. And that's why we are still demanding water in the water. I have one experience where one of the researchers said they were facing a problem somewhere complaining about water availability. But when they went there, they actually discovered that the problem was not water availability. The problem was that the soil fertility was a problem. And because of soil fertility, even if you supply water, even if there is enough excessive rainfall, it's nothing. But also one thing which we needed to note, specialization of crops. In East Africa, we are not specialized, depending on the weather. We don't cultivate depending on the weather, but on how customarily we are used to. In Tanzania, those who are coming from Tanzania, they know people who are coming in from Dodoma. The government has been always struggling with the smallholder farmers. Go for sorghum, go for sorghum. But whenever the rain comes, they go for maize. Thank you very much. You are threatening my survival.
Thank you so much, Professor Tungara, for so ably elucidating the issue of climate-resilient agriculture and also painting a very real picture of the food production situation in the region. We're going to move swiftly to the next topic in the interest of time, if you would allow us, and we'll focus on environmental sustainability and natural resources management. For this particular topic, I'd like to call on our next keynote speaker, Professor Nicholas Oguge. He's a senior professor from the University of Nairobi, after which we'll have a brief discussion with our panelists to further unpack this particular topic. Let's give Professor Oguge a round of applause as he makes his way up. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Victoria. Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, I hope the technical side will be in sync with this presentation. And as Victoria said, I'm going to be talking about environmental sustainability and natural resource management, a case for the East African Community region. And I'm going to focus on 4 components. First, the state of the environment in the East African region. Second, the framework for transformative interventions. Third, institutionalizing natural capital as a transformative strategy. And lastly, giving opportunities that we can tap into. So what do we have? If you look at the East African Community Vision 2050, they recognized that the region is richly endowed with various environmental and natural resources, including transboundary resources that are drivers for local livelihoods, national and regional economies and development. Now, this encompasses aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems. So if you look at this different ecosystem, the stocks that we have within this ecosystem is what we call the natural capital. Okay, now despite the fact that we recognize what we have locally, what we have is also recognized internationally. So from the international perspective, they recognize that East African community has habitats critical for biodiversity conservation. Now, when we talk about habitat significant or critical for biodiversity conservation, we mean those habitats that are important for threatened species, like we have the wild dog as a threatened species, and we have habitats that embrace them. We have endemic species like the mountain gorilla, and we have critical habitats in the Albertine Rift that embrace this particular species. Then we have some species that we refer to as congregatory and migratory. Now, such species include the wildebeest, for instance, that migrate between the Serengeti and Mara. And we also have the white-eared kobe in South Sudan that migrate between the Sud and Badiligo. So these are some of the greatest mammalian migration in the world. Then we also have threatened and unique ecosystems like the Akagera wetlands, the Albertine Rifts, and many other wetlands in the region. And some of our habitats are important for evolutionary processes. And an example of that are the Eastern Arc Mountains, which are the mountains running from southern Kenya, if you know the Taita Hills, and then it goes southwards into the Usambaras, the Ulugurus, and the Udzungwas in Tanzania. Now, those particular mountains are very unique in terms of the evolutionary processes that are taking place. So, how do we then recognize our natural capital? What are the partner states indicating that we have natural capital that is recognized? One is that they recognize the importance of biodiversity to contributing to the national GDP, sustaining livelihoods for majority of the citizens. For instance, if you look at Kenya, approximately 42% of Kenya's GDP and over 70% of employment is dependent on natural capital. If you look at Rwanda, it's over 45% of the GDP and 70% of employment. When you look at Tanzania, then over 65% of the GDP and over 80% of total employment and over 60% of total export earnings in Tanzania is based on this biodiversity and ecosystem services. In Uganda, they equate it at about 10%. Now, why is natural capital our focus? This is because it is important for the economy, as I've just mentioned, and specifically is because most businesses depend on biodiversity, and some of them depend on biodiversity directly. For instance, if you look at the livestock value chain, we get milk, we get meat from livestock, or even if you look at the fruits per se, we get them directly. We also have a situation where we have indirect dependence on ecosystems, or what we call ecosystem services. For instance, agriculture. Our colleague just talked about agriculture, but agriculture will not happen if we don't have pollinators. So these pollinators are providing what we call ecosystem services, but they're providing it indirectly through pollinating our crops, and therefore we get harvests. And we also have dependence on biodiversity through other supply chains. For instance, if you are feeding on biscuits, and if you're getting bread, etc. Now, these confectionery businesses are dependent on wheat that were at some stage pollinated. Now, if you look at the trends of per capita natural capital, and you project the scenario up to 2050, and this was recently done by the World Bank, then we see, and thank you for that graph, the graph to the right, you see that our natural capital is in red, and what we call the produced capital is in blue. So where the natural capital is trending downwards, we see that what our production is also going down. And if the natural capital is stable or going up, then our production will also follow. Now, this natural capital, as much as we've shown that they're important, there are also threats to them. And these threats come from the various activities we undertake, and that is why there's a global framework like the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework that specifically Target 15 is focusing on how we can address the urgent issues of biodiversity loss, but also how we can show how it is contributing to the different supply chains. So in the next slide, I just want to show you the impact of natural capital loss on ecosystem services. One of them is that we are going to lose tourism revenue, or it's going to decline. Also, the regulating capacity of the environment is going to decline, and we've heard about things like flooding. If our natural capital is not destroyed, then we are likely to get increased flooding in the sense that when it rains, the water will not quickly run into the drainage system and into the rivers and flood, because they'll be retained within the terrestrial system for longer. Then we also have to take cognizance that the cost of mitigating the damage caused by flooding will also be increasing because there'll be increased flooding. But also, there's going to be a decline in harvestable resources, and that is perhaps through agriculture and other forms of production systems. So then let's look at the 5 direct drivers of biodiversity loss. There's direct exploitation. If we are capturing or harvesting timber, non-timber products from forests, if you are harvesting our wildlife for consumption or for whatever purposes, there is that of extraction that's currently going on. Another one is environmental pollution. This is more common in our urban areas with a lot of plastic wastes and other form of solid wastes, and as well as water pollution. And then there's invasive species, and one of them is like the water hyacinth that is affecting our waterways. And then, of course, the land use changes. As you can see, the middle picture there, there's a very strong contrast as people are getting into the forest areas. So these land use changes impact our biodiversity and natural capital. Now, the last one I want to talk about in that respect is climate change. There was a reanalysis of the global climate from 1940, and this showed that last Friday last week, was the only time in the world when the global temperature exceeded 2 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial levels. Now, this is what we are trying to prevent in these different COPs, but we've already shown that this is likely to occur since it's already occurring in some form. So there's a scenario that we undertook on the climate change and how it's likely to impact our natural resources in this region. And that graph is giving us historic and projected annual temperatures, and the graph below is the anomaly that we see from comparing the 2 graphs at the top. And this basically means that we are going to have higher temperatures, and as temperatures increase, there's going to be a number of things happening. One is going to be the decline in fresh water quality, quantity, and flow. The next slide. Now we can give example of 2 basins in the region. We have the Pangani River Basin, which is east of where we are, and we have the Mara River Basin, which is west of where we are. And we see in the Pangani River Basin, there's going to be reduced food and water security for the people. There's going to be, of course, the population increase as is. At the moment, it's estimated that 75% of the population in Pangani River Basin are underwater stress. So we have to project what's going to happen when the water levels decline further due to climate change. And Pangani River Basin is also important for hydropower generation and also for production of rice or irrigated crops in this region. So what's going to happen to those components? Now, if you look at Mara River Basin on the other side, then we see that in about 6 years ago, the water demand was about 30 million cubic liters. So the demand by 2045 to 2050 will be over 2,600 million cubic liters. So we have to project with the climate change and this demand, how are we going to transformatively try to address the issue? So the other problem is decline in agriculture, productivity, which of course has been also mentioned in the last talk. Then we are going to have degradation of vegetation and soils. Now this means that there's going to be a decline in habitat quality, but also habitat connectivity, which we have to deal with. Then there's going to be a decline in habitat suitability for species. And again, we've undertaken scenarios for climate as well as habitat suitability. And that shows, if you go to the next slide, please, that shows that the habitat suitability for critical wildlife is going to decline. So for each of mountain gorilla, wildebeest, and the wild dog, what you see at the top left of each of them is the current habitat suitability. It's not the distribution of the species, but the habitat suitability. Now, the other 3 slides within each component shows the different climate scenarios and what's likely to happen to the habitats. So we see that the mountain gorilla, the habitat is going to decline substantially, and so is the wildebeest and the wild dog. Now, this is just information for us to start action, for us to plan what are we going to do given this knowledge. We also know that there's going to be a decline in different wild species, and I'm giving an example of birds in the next slide. And this projection is showing that the bird species, the top left, again, is the current situation, and the others are the different climate models. And we see that the habitats are going to shrink, so how are we going to make interventions? So that brings us to the next section on intervention frameworks. So what is East African community doing? What are the partner states doing? Or what should they be doing? And we have a framework known as Value-Centered Leverage Points, or VLP. The next slide there. Now, this particular framework is it was recently developed, and it is giving us a series of things we can try to undertake to improve sustainability. First of all, is we need to undertake evaluation of what we have, and we also need to embed this evaluation in decision making. We need to institutionalize it, and we also need to come up with a program to shift people's way of thinking so that we can have a sustainable system. So in the next slide, I'm just giving a summary of this particular framework. It says basically we need to adequately recognize the values of nature by undertaking plural valuations. There are different kinds of valuations. One of them is natural capital accounting. We need to meaningfully include the diverse values of nature into decisions by embedding valuation into inclusive decision-making processes. We need to undertake institutional changes based on reformulating policy and regulations to consider nature's diverse values. And we need to drive a shift in personal beliefs, values, and paradigms that underpin how people relate to nature and to each other in a more just and sustainable ways. So, I want to quickly go through how the partner states and the East African community can be related to this particular framework. So first of all, adequately recognizing the values of nature. Here, we can give examples from Rwanda, Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania. Rwanda is undertaking natural capital accounts for land, water, and mining. And this is being integrated into planning processes. They've also undertaken ecosystem accounts tracked over 25 years and focused on soil. And they've also done what we call total economic valuation of Akagera wetlands complex. And now they know the value of what they have. If you look at Uganda, they're doing a focus on the national capital accounting, which revolves around land, forest, wetlands, tourism, soils, and water accounts. And they've initially done physical land accounts, which was completed in 2019. If you look at Kenya, we are working on system of environmental ecosystem accounts since 2017, and the first pilot energy accounts was developed in 2018. And the country has since prioritized development of water, forest, mineral, and ecosystem accounts. Tanzania is also at the basis of commencing these approaches, but the interesting thing is they have 270,000 square kilometers under protected area system, which is very important. Now, what is happening at the regional level? If you look at the next slide, at the regional level, then we have a situation whereby the East African community undertook valuation of 4 transboundary ecosystems between Kenya and Tanzania, between Tanzania and Rwanda and Burundi, between Burundi, Rwanda, between Rwanda, DRC and Uganda, and between Uganda, South Sudan, and Kenya. And they used 9 ecosystem services, which is provisioning services, the cultural services, and regulating services. And they have information on the value of those critical transboundary landscapes, which is approximately $11 billion per year. So the next component is including the diverse values of this nature into decisions. And again, here I have 2 examples, one from Rwanda and the other from Uganda. Now in Rwanda, they're mainstreaming natural capital accounts into development activities in the strategic plan for the environment and natural resource sector, 2018 to 2024. And this means that adopting natural capital accounting practices to track total economic value of natural capital to the Rwandan economy, focusing on land, water, forests, wetlands, and mining. Now, in Uganda, if you go to the next slide, in Uganda, we find that the Ugandan government is actively integrating natural capital accounts into the system of national accounts and into the macroeconomic indicators. Now, if you are looking at how the partner states are institutionalizing natural capital in the economy, in the next slide, then we see that Kenya has put about 1.2% of the GDP of the budget on natural capital. Uganda is approximately 0.9 and Rwanda about 2.4%. But the critical issue is that these budget allocations are inadequate, but also we need to bring in the conversation other sectors like the treasury, for instance. Now, next slide is just telling us how East African community is institutionalizing natural capital into its strategies, and this is through an action plan which is integrating people's needs, business needs, and nature. And lastly, I want to go quickly through the opportunities due to lack of time. So if you go to the next slide. Now, next slide is a bit busy, and it's telling us about the interventions we can have using nature-based solutions, which essentially we are looking at investments that are going to address societal challenges and therefore contribute to human well-being and biodiversity benefits. And at the same time, those investments must have good business models so that they have investment outcomes. And in this particular graph, we are giving some examples of what can be undertaken, and the big message is that we need to support the private sector to invest in regenerative supply chain models to boost yield and productivity while enhancing environmental services. But we also need to build capacity of communities for effective natural resource management and support integrating the value of nature, people, and society into business decisions. And the next slide here, I'm just showing you that as we go into the issue of carbon accounting, we have methodology that have been developed for grasslands that shows that in case we do what we call prescribed burning over three fires over 10 years, then we can build a very good ecosystem that supports all these components. And the next slide is basically just giving an example of what can be done in the carbon markets. And here we are giving example of what's already going on in southern Kenya with a group known as Soralo. And if they link up with the communities in northern Tanzania, then they can generate huge amount of money from the carbon markets. And I'll say asanteni sana in the next slide.
Thank you so much. One more round of applause for Professor Oguge, taking us through the context setting for our conversation on environmental sustainability and natural resources management. At this juncture, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, I'd like to make a quick announcement. We're going to have a working tea break of sorts. So to my far right of the room, you can grab a cup of coffee or tea and something to bite as we continue with our deliberations. I'd like to invite my panelists for this segment, Engineer Coletta Ruhamia, who is the Deputy Executive Director of the Lake Victoria Basin Commission. Let's give her a round of applause as she makes her way up. We also have joining us Innocent Kabenga from the IUCN. He's the regional head and land systems, as well as the country representative for Kenya. Also joining the panel is Mr. Canon Godi Muhumuza, who is the executive secretary of the East African Center of Excellence for Renewable Energy and Efficiency. And then, of course, we'll be moving on to our third topic, which will be looking at climate finance. Thank you all for joining me. You can have your seats on the panel as we begin. Fantastic. So I think I'll begin with Innocent, if I may. And if you can take us through some of the examples, especially when it comes to community-led initiatives that really have effectively shown a climate resilience from where you sit, and some of those grassroots efforts that you've tapped into to scale those opportunities. I'll start with you.
Okay, thank you very much, moderator. Actually, I'm very happy that I'm responding to your question after listening to two professors who talked very interesting issues that are related actually to what I'm going to talk in a way. If you look around East African community countries, we do have a lot of examples of community-led initiative, and I have just selected about 4. The first one is community-based adaptation projects. In many countries vulnerable to climate change in East Africa community, we do have a lot of very good projects that have been carried out by communities, including rainwater harvesting, building small-scale irrigation systems, and implementing conservation agriculture. Number two, there are a lot of examples actually if you look at natural resources management and conservation. They do participate actually a lot in sustainable forestry, fisheries, and wildlife efforts. They establish actually most of the time in different countries community managed reserves to protect ecosystem and biodiversity in those countries. We do have some examples, for example, conservancy models in Kenya, wildlife management areas in Tanzania and Uganda, etc., etc. And these, they do have a very positive, actually, impact in terms of contributing to ecosystem resilience, maintain biodiversity, and ensure sustainability resources, and that benefit both the environment and local livelihood. The third one, and I'll finish with the fourth, it's about community-based renewable energy projects. You do have some small projects that are community-based on solar, wind, hydropower, the mini hydropower here, that's what I mean. And also they do collaborate with NGOs and government to have this. And the last one is a climate resilient infrastructure and development. Actually, if you look in some cities at a small scale, you do realize that some communities are adopting innovative infrastructure solutions like green roofs, permeable pavement, and flood-resistant buildings. So all these have a very positive, actually, outcomes, and they help to mitigate the impact of extreme weather events, and they protect also lives and properties. But the issue here, all these are at a small scale, and sometimes they are not known. That's why I support what Professor Tungara said when he talked about localized research, and I hope this will be really go down to these wonderful projects that have produced a lot of good results so that they can be scaled up.
And speaking of projects that do work, let me come to you, Engineer Coletta, and talk about water resource management and conservation. What strategies, what technologies have you seen have worked in that area?
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I think when we talk on strategies, I would go for adaptive water resources management. And I would explain this in two aspects. Probably we start with integrated planning, of which I also echo our young ambassador, who said we should sit together, all the sectors, whether you are a water manager or you are water users. And I'm saying this because most of our practice, I speak as a policymaker, a regulator, and also implementer, and also a lecturer, of course, bringing science aspect into this. So when you don't sit together and try to prioritize how you allocate water to different users, and also not also for users to just receive water, if you are from agricultural sector, energy sector, and the like, but you also have to plan collectively how to manage that resources, of which you find we have a lot of gaps. Another area I want to bring as a strategy is also cooperation and partnership, especially in the transboundary waters, of which that's why you have Lake Victoria Basin Commission, I have Lake Tanganyika Authority, and the Nile Basin Initiative, and the like. So we should not think in our respective countries it's just for us. Eventually it ends up into the bigger resources that is shared by many countries. So transboundary cooperation is a very critical element in all forms of sustainable management of water resources, so that we ensure security, as previous speaker said, and also through biodiversity protection, to building stronger economies and ensuring peace and security in the region. Allow me, Madam Moderator, to come to technologies, of course, because of the time that you have, of which I think Professor talked about it, the two professors. We have to address the issue of water management and climate resilience in the perspective that we need to do our best of the resources we have and the capacity within us and our communities. I would say, for example, when we look at the water storage system, of which I Professor Ogunge talked about it. We are not doing good in that area. But yet there are some small things that you can do, and actually even, but they are on small scale. Yet you can educate our communities on the ground to work together and ensure at least you have minimum water storage systems, where you find the rain, it is raining today, the water flows with topsoil, which is fertile, it goes to the downstream. So we are actually exporting, if I can put it into monetary value, with professors can help us. We are exporting water, we are exporting the topsoil, which is more fertile, then we are remaining with the soil that will have to fertilize by adding more value, more fertilizers, which is more costly. So I think when he was talking about the natural capital account, that is the meaning, and prioritize where we think it's a priority to achieve more results. On the same technologies, I would say, if you look in the wastewater treatment system, we have the nature base, of which also they talked about. Especially, I'll give an example where we are investing in constructed wetland as part of wastewater treatment system. But at the end, you are destroying the God-given wetlands that could perform the same function. So you are investing in constructed wetland for the purpose of wastewater management or wastewater treatment. But again, you are destroying the wetland that has been provided by God to support us to protect the other wetlands. I'm not saying we should not be using wetlands for agricultural purposes and the other things, but science tells us if it says in these 4 wetlands, this has to be protected to make the remaining 3 wetlands provide the ecosystem services that Professor was talking about, and also including the water conservation. So those are the things we need to be improving on how we do things. Also, the third is conservation of existing water sources. Of course, like wetlands, I have mentioned it. But it is very unfortunate that you find, as we plan for other interventions, but you forget some components that are key. And I want to give example, again, as the integrated planning. Give example like our big project, the Rusumo hydropower, that is for all of us in the East Africa. But of recently, if you see, that investment is more, I think, than 300 million USD, but the catchment management is in question, is not really planned for that. Yet, it will be serving that heavy investment to make sure there is continuous supply of electricity. So we need to go at the drawing board and see what exactly we are doing best, where do we have gaps, and try to address those gaps. As I conclude, Madam Moderator, allow me to say this. It will be a shame, it will be actually a sin, if a region like ours, with Lake Victoria, African largest lake, and second largest in the world.
Thank you so much, Engineer Coletta, for painting that picture, and of course, being very wary of interventions that sometimes can throw our ecosystems out of balance. Let me come to you, Canon. As we talk about renewable energy and low carbon technologies, from where you sit, which projects excite you, which give you promise and can be scaled within the region?
Yeah, thank you very much, Moderator. And thank you, members. I think I should use 1 or 2 minutes to blow the whistle for the IACRI, because I believe that some of us gathered here may not be aware of what IACRI is. So give me only 2 minutes to blow the whistle. So IACRI, which I represent as its executive director, is the East African Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency. And it was established by the East African partner states to promote renewable energy and energy efficiency in the region. Subsequent to its establishment, the East African Council, at its 33rd meeting held on 29th of February 2016, designated Makerere University College of Engineering, Design, and Art and Technology, otherwise known as SEDAT, as a regional center, and asked it expressly to house IACRI, and also expressly asked Makerere University by way of a letter vid PSS 1/2/36, dated May 3rd, 2017, to register Makerere University, IACRI, as a non-for-profit company limited by guarantee. I thought that that kind of history is pertinent, especially at a gathering like this, because IACRI is our center, your center, the East African Center. Currently, IACRI is in the process of consultations with each partner state, and soon I'm sending out an agenda. Each Minister of Energy and East African Minister of East African Affairs on how IACRI can be best transitioned into an EAC institution. Why am I saying that? Another 1 minute. It's because since its registration, some of the EAC member states look at it not as an EAC center, but as a Makerere center, which is not true. I would like to give a testimony that Makerere University in any way does not meddle in the works and activities of the EAC, of the East African Center for Renewable Energy. Save for the fact that it has since 2016 housed it, paid all the electricity and water and energy bills, and given it security. I should also suffice to say that since IACRI's birth, it has never any of the EAC member states, including Uganda, where it is housed. So I encourage each one of us here to actually find it in our hearts to support our center, the East African Center for Renewable Energy. I will not go in its achievements, but one of the major achievements is that it has, through its own initiative as a child, developed the minimum energy performance standards, which I'm happy to note that have been adopted by by the EAC and by most of the member states. So, going back to the renewable energy, what is interesting us within our mandate as the East African Center for Renewable Energy is actually low carbon technologies, among others. Because there is a lot that we are doing. Because renewable energy is derived from the natural sources, as my sister has been saying previously, that are replenished at a higher rate than they are consumed. They include hydro, solar, wind, biomass, and geothermal, among others. The East African community is endowed, as we are all aware, with abundant renewable energy sources. Because my sister previously talked of rivers, lakes, forests, and all sorts of wetlands, and the like. So transition to renewable energy reduces greenhouse gas emissions and contributes to a healthy climate. Low carbon technologies are encouraged and should be encouraged in our EAC region, and these are technologies that emit low level of carbon dioxide emissions or no carbon dioxide at all. And they include wind turbines, solar panels, solar water pumps, electric pressure cookers, solar water heaters, solar dryers, green hydro technologies, among others. I must hasten to say that last week I was at a Vienna conference of GenSec partners, of which Yakuri is among. And we have been encouraged to encourage our member states, our partner states, to write about e-cooking in relation to the helping of women and youth. So if anyone of us here is interested, I'm going to send a circular as well. Please, I can be contacted after this. There is a $20 million grant. I wanted also to talk about electricity access in East African region. To date, electricity access in the region is at an average rate of 44.2%, with Uganda having 57, Kenya 75, Rwanda 61, Burundi 12, South Sudan 7.24, Tanzania the highest 78, and DRC 19. I have the graph here, but I didn't get, I was not given the time to project it. So some regulatory and policy frameworks have also been already done in regard to renewable energy in the EAC region. And we have the EAC Treaty, Article 101, 6 EAC Development Strategy, Regional Strategy on Scaling Up Access to Modern Energy, Climate Change Policy, Access Cross-the-Border Electricity Policy, East African Energy Security Policy Framework 2018, and National Energy Policies and Regulations in the EAC partner states. We have energy challenges in the EAC, especially low electricity access, as I have said in the area, high dependence on biomass, we have high dependence on fossil fuels, low quality energy products and technologies, poor disposal of renewable energy components, and then limited capacity of trained renewable energy personnel. As you may realize, we have very few in the EAC region. And as a result, I come up with I'm making the following recommendations if they can be adopted. That we develop favorable policies and regulatory environmental framework on renewable energy and energy efficiency. That we develop and enforce, with development and enforcement of quality standards, investment in renewable energy and energy efficiency technologies, investment in testing laboratories for renewable energy and energy efficiency, promotion of productive use of energy, research, development, and innovations, support local manufacturing, renewable energy and energy efficiency technologies and products. And this one we were asked specifically, all the centers, to inform our partner states that UNIDO is particularly interested. Training and capacity building as well, awareness creation and communication, affordable financing for renewable energy and energy efficiency, then stakeholder coordination, and intentional mobilization of funding for renewable energy and energy efficiency sector. And lastly, I request the partner states to support in the institutionalization of East African Center for Renewable Energy into a fully fledged and fully supported institution of the East African community. And I'm drafting a document which I'm going to move around the countries, circulating and discussing with various bodies. And it can either be by each partner state being a guarantor, or by protocol, or by way of an act of the East African Legislative Assembly. I thank you for listening to me, and I submit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. One last round of applause for my panelists, Mr. Innocent Kabenga. Thank you for coming in, Engineer Coletta, and of course, Mr. Canon Godi Muhumuza. You may take your seats. Thank you very much for your insights during this session. Now, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we are about to move to our final thematic area, which will look at climate financing and resource mobilization. Allow me to give you a statistic that I came across from New Growth International. And it said food systems transformation in Africa requires up to $77 billion a year. This is just from the public sector, and up to $180 billion from the private sector. And that essentially is what our conversation is at this juncture. How do we mobilize those resources to ensure that the region is food secure and to upscale our food systems? Allow me to invite our keynote speaker for this segment, Dr. Patricia Lavery from the African Development Bank. She is the country director for Tanzania, after which we'll have a brief panel discussion. Let's give her a round of applause as she makes her way up. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon. I was hoping that this session will be interactive. Good afternoon. Good. So at least I know I'm not talking to myself. So it gives me great pleasure to be here to deliver the keynote address at this very important session on climate finance and resource mobilization. My session will be structured into three parts. Besides my statement, I will ask my colleague, our main climate change focal person at the ADB office here in Tanzania, to illustrate one of the projects that the African Development Bank is financing, to give you a sense of how the African Development Bank is working with different member states on climate adaptation. And next, I'll ask our colleague from the East African Business Council to share some of the financial instruments that are available to the private sector in the East African business community. So, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to be here, and please allow me to congratulate the EAC Secretariat for organizing this event. This summit comes at a critical time, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic, where a lot of emphasis was placed on water and sanitation, hygiene. Please remember that frequent and proper hand washing was the frontline defense mechanism as we're trying to adapt to COVID-19. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because we cannot discuss climate change without discussing the water sector. So for us at the African Development Bank, what we have been doing, not just in response to COVID, but also in response to the energy prices emerging from the Russia-Ukraine crisis, is that the bank has been mobilizing funds to help countries with, of course, food security and energy prices. The adverse impacts of climate change in the East African community does, of course, threaten the region's socioeconomic development, and it negatively affects livelihoods and the broader economies. The climate change, of course, some of the presentations have highlighted the extreme weather phenomena that we are experiencing in the East African region and how this is affecting food security, energy security, of course, land degradation, loss of biodiversity, its effect on tourism and hospitality, livestock, the prevalence of diseases, how it's affecting pests, rising sea levels, and so on. Ladies and gentlemen, the severe droughts, floods, and extreme weather events associated with climatic variability are now occurring at increased frequency and intensity, and this places not just a greater burden on the fiscus, on African member states, but for us as the African Development Bank, this implies that we need to have more fast disbursing emergency lending instruments to deploy in response to the adverse impacts of climate change. The African Development Bank, as you are aware, is the premier multilateral development financial institution in Africa. We're the lender of last resort, and our primary goal is to reduce poverty and improve living standards by mobilizing resources to boost macroeconomic growth and help countries more broadly with technical assistance and refinancing their priority development projects. With respect to our strategic priorities and what guides our interventions across the continent, we do have our 10-year strategy. We have our high fives: Power Africa, Feed Africa, Integrate Africa, Industrialize Africa, and improve the quality of life for people in Africa. But of course, the water cuts across all of our high five priority areas. But of course, besides our high fives, there's the AU's Agenda 2063 and the SDGs that guide our interventions across the continent. Ladies and gentlemen, over the years, the African Development Bank's interventions through the Water and Sanitation Department have focused on addressing integrated and transboundary water resources. Of course, we do have a water supply, sanitation, and hygiene for all initiative, as well as certain engagements in the private sector. Here in Tanzania, one of our interventions is the Dodoma Resilient and Sustainable Water Supply and Sanitation Program, where the African Development Bank is investing through its non-concessional loan that we issued last year to the government of Tanzania to assist the government in supporting the construction of the Farqua Dam and designing water catchment protection and management projects. Ladies and gentlemen, at this juncture, I'll invite my colleague Engineer Justus to share one of the projects that I just mentioned, the Dodoma Resilient and Sustainable Water Supply and Sanitation Project. Justus, can you please come to the podium? Thank you.
Can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah, let me say good afternoon, everybody. As she has said, I'm Justus Tabura, the water and sanitation expert working with the African Development Bank. Let me share with you what we are doing at the bank, specifically in the area of climate change. Starting with my slide over there, in a summary form that climate change has been affecting us, not in one sector, but in several sectors. Like you can see over there, we have 3 photos where you can see it seems as if agricultural field has been washed away because of the flood. But the photo in between, you can see there are some areas in Tanzania where people, mostly ladies, are going to fetch water, but they can't see it because of the issues of climate change and several other challenges. But underneath, you can see there is a flood. Most of the vehicles are washed away. It means that if we control the water which is flooding, it can be used even during the dry season. So quickly, what I would say, the bank, we are really supporting those kind of climate resilient infrastructure, but we realize that apart from other challenges, the main challenge which is facing most of the implementers, it's financing. Now I'm going to go quickly to the financing area, but also I will give you an example of what we are doing in Tanzania. Thank you. Go again. Proceed. The next one. Yes, over there. Yeah, in a summary, the African Development Bank provides support mainly to the government, but as well as to the private sector. And we have 2 major operations. The first one is, we call it a sovereign loan, but the second one is a non-sovereign loan, where you can find the loan to the private sector in several options. But also we have the so-called blending financing, where we can have the sovereign loan, but at the same time non-sovereign loan. This is an area where we can call it like a PPP arrangement. When we want to support any project or a program, it means the preliminary stage, we need something like a concept note which comes out from either feasibility studies and the design, but also there is a component of environmental and social impact assessment. Those are the key areas which we need to have a look so that we can proceed with the project preparation. The sources in general from the bank, we have many, but also we have other sources from the climate financing window, and also we have other institutions which are hosted at the African Development Bank, which are supporting mainly studies like African Water Facility. To get such kind of fund, as I said before, you have to submit a request for, let's say for the sovereign loan, it means you have to submit a request through the Ministry of Finance. I'm taking an example of the United Republic of Tanzania. But for grants, mostly, we receive the core proposal, we share with the community, with our stakeholder, like the government institution and others, where you prepare your proposal, you submit, and then from there, you get a first screen, the second screen, and third screening. And at the end of the day, you get funding, but most of them are made for preparing the studies, ICIA, and the design. Through accessing the loan, we have several cycles, starting from programming and identification, where you look at the priority of the country, But at the same time, we look at whether the project you are proposing is in line with the government guidelines as well as the strategic plans. But from there, after you submit a request for proposal, it means, let's say, if it's a sovereign loan, through the Ministry of Finance, it means we start a preparation. That's where we develop a project concept note, working together with the government or our other stakeholder, and later we go to the appraisal, preparing the appraisal report. Finally, we go to the body approval, and lastly, we start implementation. But of course, at the end of the day, we need to have the final report, which is called the project completion report. This slide, I'm going to give you an example of the climate resilient infrastructure of which we are supporting in Tanzania, like our manager has just mentioned. It's called the Dodoma Resilient Sustainable Water Development and Sanitation Program. This project, I would say, it's not a project, it's a program of about 700 million USD, but we have started with the phase 1. The phase 2 will follow, and the third phase will follow. The phase 1, we have just started already, in which we are going to construct a big dam of about 47 million cubic meter, but at the same time to have a component on catchment protection. As of now, we have started the consultant services, especially those ones who are going to supervise the project. And what I would say, finally, at the end of the day, the project or the program will address climate change, adaptation, and mitigation measures, but support irrigation activity as well as fishing, and also it's going to support it's going to work as rainwater harvesting, controlling flood as well as drought. And finally, it is going to supply water to Dodoma City, let's say for about 10 years to come, of about 2.5 million people. So I would like to end my presentation by saying thank you very much, but let us work together to develop a bankable proposal so that they can assist us to mobilize some funds for supporting climate resilient infrastructure. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. So that just goes to illustrate how the African Development Bank is helping countries with their climate adaptation measures. We're in Dodoma using climate adaptation techniques to provide water supply in Dodoma.
with the private sector in terms of coming up with a strong instrument to support resilience, to support adaptation, to support mitigation. This is very important, and that's why I want to thank the African Development Bank and also thank GIZ. When you look at the region, we've been grappling with 3 Cs, COVID, climate change, and the recent Russia-Ukraine conflict. Those 3 Cs have had a very devastating effect on our economies. But the EAC as I mentioned, we've been working closely with the African World Bank, is the only region that has demonstrated remarkable resilience across eight regional economic communities. Currently, we are posting 5.1% GDP growth. And I want to really thank our head of state, thank the ministers here. It is through public-private partnership. And we need really not to forget that our resilience depends largely on how best government works with the private sector to improve business environment. The second aspect that has shown resilience is our diversified agriculture. Despite all these shocks, our agriculture in the region remains resilient. And the third aspect has been productive infrastructure. And really, I want to commend our head of state through public-private partnership that you are doing quite commendable in terms of infrastructure. Quickly, I'm given only 3 minutes. We participated in the climate summit in Nairobi, and we have a private sector engagement declaration. And through that declaration, there are requests we made to our governments. And there is also commitment from the private sector what we need to do on ourselves. So that is very important. One is the restructuring of the global financial architecture to scale up affordable and sustainable financing. This includes reviewing lending terms, revising capital adequacy, making finance flows consistent with low emissions and resilience. As global tax regimes on climate change develops, African governments should ensure they establish a clear and predictive regulations, policies, and long-term strategy that supports a just energy transition. African governments need to put in place a transition mechanism in line with common but differentiated responsibilities aligned to the Paris Agreement. African states need to include micro, small, medium enterprises, that is MSMEs. When we talk about MSMEs, we are talking about youth and women, into every national strategy focused on climate action, sustainable growth by offering accessible financial support and facilitating skills development program to build the capacity. Multilateral development banks and development financial institutions, they need to speed up the alignment with joint MDB Paris alignment framework that is required to carry out the Bridgeton Initiative. They can do this by making investment in climate action in Africa less risky. And really, this could involve providing grants, concession financing, credit, and risk guarantees. There is a need to review climate finance models from project-based approach to long-term climate investment plans, aligned to the growth, development needs, and this call for enhanced support to develop climate investment readiness plans towards the realization of system transition to sustainable and resilient economies. So as private sector, we have 4 commitments. Work with African states to ensure that the mechanisms are in place that channel needed funds to mitigate and adapt to climate change in Africa. Establish a mechanism that scale up green investment with the private sector that includes public-private partnership and specific focus on micro, small, medium enterprises. Enhancing approaches and innovation for increasing inclusion through finance, technology to address climate challenges in Africa. Participate and provide insight in the development of climate investment readiness plan. Finally, we will also call upon our African government to work with the private sector in development of an Africa-centric climate taxonomy that is accepted internationally to provide for the definition of acceptable risks, because Africa has been perceived as a risk continent, and that is a perception generated. We need to de-risk our continent. the establishment of joint public-private forum for climate change and green investment in Africa that is designed to access large markets, dynamics, sustainable production and consumption, and drive eco-friendly consumer patterns. African states need to encourage sustainable practices and circular models across all our sectors. Currently, I was sharing with my colleagues, panelists, that 40% of our food goes to waste. It's not about issues of climate change, but it is the issues of managing waste. How do we really ensure that we embrace a circular economy in East Africa? 49% of our food goes to waste. Another aspect has been information asymmetry. How do we share? How do we use technology to identify the food surplus region so that they can feed food deficit region? So we need to use technology. So as private sector, we commit to adopt green circular business model, designing products that are environmental friendly and ensuring integration of sustainability through the value chain. Finally, working with our partner states to raise awareness, adoption of value addition, and green manufacturing practices by our industries, and particularly micro, small, medium enterprises. Asanteni sana. Thank you very much for listening to me. Asanteni sana.
Thank you very much, John Bosco. Where Africa's premier multilateral financial institutions and our footprint is all over East Africa in terms of the instruments that we have available that are used to support climate change. For the private sector, we issue loans to corporate loans, A and B loans. We issue lines of credit to banks across East Africa. We also work with them on equity participation, and we also do issue guarantees to de-risk some of the loans that some of the businesses and banks do take. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a pleasure, and this concludes our presentation. Thank you very much, and may God bless us all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lavery. You may take your seat. John Bosco, thank you as well. You may take your seat. Thank you for your interventions. We're going to now segue into the panel discussion. Let me quickly introduce my panelists who are already on stage. Thank you very much for that. We have Dr. Richard Muyungi, who is the Advisor and Special Presidential Envoy for Environment and Climate Change here in Tanzania. And we also have Dr. Mukisa Kitui, former Secretary General of UNCTAD. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me for this discussion. I'll join you in a minute, but let me first field the question to you, Dr. Muyungi. You know, when we talk about innovative financial mechanisms, instruments that exist, especially when it comes to tackling climate mitigation and adaptation, what exists for the region? And how can member states, partner states, leverage and access these instruments? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I will start with a bit of context. Climate finance traditionally has been seen as funding from developed countries to developing countries. And we have traditionally looked upon the UNFCCC Secretariat as an organ to provide clarity for countries to get that financing. And therefore, as member states, we have engaged in establishing funds which could help us to address climate financing. We have the LDC Fund, Adaptation Fund, GCF now. We are now talking about the Loss and Damage Fund. Looking at what we have in those funds in terms of the real resources is nothing compared to what we need. And therefore, this is why we believe we need to turn the course of our approach to climate financing. Opportunities are out there. What we need is to understand how they work and how we can engage, and as you said rightly, how we can engage other sectors, whether it's about private sector or it's about pension funds, or it's about local government authorities, or it's about other instruments which can help us to address climate change. And I'll give you what we have in the Eastern African side. 2 years ago, I was honored to provide a document called East African Climate Change Finance Mobilization and Access Strategy. This is a strategy for the next 20 years, 2023, 2032, a very important document. From the strategy, we noted that what we need is almost 1/10 of what we have been getting. We need $260 billion within the region to address climate change, but looking at what we have been getting is only 2.5 billion annually, making in the last 10 years about 26 billion. Now this is important. How do you, going forward, ensure that you get what you need? So we came up with suggestions. One is to look somewhere else rather than the UNFCCC. Looking somewhere else meaning how do you engage non-traditional non-state actors in the climate financing? We do understand there are a couple of opportunities there. We can engage the private sector in many, many areas. I don't want to go into details. But one area which we believe is extremely important is looking at climate finance as a business. Business in terms of carbon trade. This is a new area, huge area. It covers not only forestry, but almost all the sectors. And if you look at what is happening now globally, $90 billion is being transacted in terms of the volume of the carbon trade going around annually across the globe. What are we getting in the eastern side? You need to get that through two things. One, capacity building, understanding very well how this business works. And this is what we are lacking. So we naturally depend on others to tell us how business works. This is why we said with the highest resources needed today to address climate change, not only about the carbon sinks, where we have the largest forest areas, if you put in DRC, but also the critical minerals needed today to address climate change. How do we engage our private sector to ensure that that becomes a business and a real opportunity for the sub-region to leverage the resources we need? So I will leave you with this. One, we need to ensure that capacity is well built. We understand how climate finance works beyond the UNFCCC process. Secondly, how best we can engage our partners to leverage areas where we think we can work together, including nature swaps, but also service for ecosystem, financing for the ecosystem services. And I'll tell you an example. Recently, I was in Mexico. The watersheds of Mexico City, including Cancun, are partially supported by Coca-Cola. Why? Because Coca-Cola is benefiting a lot from the water resources. And therefore, we can emulate the same on the Eastern African side. So really, we need to work together with the private sector, with other non-government actors, including, of course, as I said, the local government authorities, the funds, to ensure that we really leverage on what we get, which is completely not enough, and it's not to help us to address the needs we have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mayungi. Let me come to you, Dr. Kitui. When we look at the East African community and the region, how do we promote, how do we incentivize green investments as we move forward and encourage more private sector participation in that sense?
If you don't mind, I would like to end with that because it's the tail end of what I wanted to make as a statement here. You see, next year at the COP29, there are intentions to launch the new collective financing agreement, which is the successor of the 2009 agreement that pegged financing at $100 billion. It's useful that we reflect on what went wrong with what we have, and then suggest how to correct what we are to get. And I want to say a few things about that in the context of East Africa and East African community. One, the figure of $100 billion that we have been toying with for some time now has never been realized. It was very arbitrary in its allocation as climate financing, not quite in sync with the ambitions of the Paris Agreement. And even then, the best case scenario, which is the assessment by OECD, is that it reached maximum $83 billion financing in the best year. Oxfam thinks it is closer to $21 billion. The circumstances have been exacerbated by three major concerns that have to inform our thinking now. The first one is the COVID pandemic. The social cost of COVID eats into state resilience and capacity to finance climate-related development activity. The second is the overhang of debt. An average African country today is using 5 times as much resources on debt service as it uses on climate-related resilience work. So you cannot delink the overhang of debt and the necessary steps if the next collective agreement on climate finance is to be sustainable. But the third and most important, rather than picking figures from the sky, it's important that the felt conditions of the developing countries are a critical and a core component in identifying what is the climate financing that we need. In 2019, when I was Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, I presented to the UN family some proposals that I thought were important in reforming the architecture of finance and the architecture of financing climate action. And I wish to just give, in bullet form, the 4 main proposals, because I think they're important to resuscitate today as part of what we could present to the table for the new collective agreement on financing, climate financing. The first one, and the most urgent to me, is what I've just mentioned, the debt distress that 60% of low-income countries are experiencing or are just on the brink of major debt distress. We cannot wish that away. We cannot decouple economic development and climate finance, climate resilience. The second priority should be consider innovative ways to deploy the IMF special drawing rights. While it's important to ring-fence the critical value of the SDRs, that's that they are conditionality-free and they are debt-free source of liquidity, it is possible that there are smart ways to enhance the use of the SDR rights of the countries that own SDRs to be aligned with the climate financing requirements and resilience. Raising such ambition within the context of the dialogue of the IMF will be a very important way of going beyond the limits we have seen in implementing the 100 billions per year pledges that we received. The third source of climate financing that's critically important is the hundreds of government and regional government development finance institutions that exist, the development banks. You see, at a time when we're increasingly looking to team up with private capital, it's important we also realize the reality that many private financing institutions are pro-cyclical. And that's not consistent with the longer-term needs of planning resilience in governments. And that means that although we will need partnership with the private sector, unlocking and aligning the resources of multilateral development institutions, banks, Africa Development Bank, regional development banks, even national development banks, and getting them more capitalization is going to be one of the most important ways to align long-term economics and development planning within governments. This, I think, is particularly important, partly with the strengthened governance of regional development institutions. You can manage to attract more capital buy-in by developed countries, the way the new development bank has just done, as a way of raising dependable resources. And finally, back to private sector partnerships, I think I agree with you about the importance that we align the policies of investors and private finance with the goals of climate resilience. But it's also important that we strengthen the regulatory capacity of states so that greenwashing, which is just a CSR propaganda tool, cannot be used to cheat about greening finance when it's just to appear like you are apt. And finally, which is again to the East African community, I had the privilege to be a member of council here about nearly 20 years ago. And one of the main things that we should look at when we're looking at the frontiers of regional development is the strength of approaching financial markets on the wholesale instead of on the retail. If we're looking to unlock multilateral financing for climate resilience, our voice is strengthened if we align our policies within the community and we approach the institutions collectively as a community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kitui and Dr. Mayungi. You may take your seats as we transition into the next part of the program. Now, we want to hear from our honorable ministers who have been sitting through the discussions and the deliberations for most of the morning into the afternoon. And this will be the perfect transition, the perfect segue into the EAC regional position towards the COP28 conference, which is next week. Now, allow me to call on a few individuals to join me on stage. I would request if you'd first take the panelist seats, and I will then call you to the podium to give your final interventions on the various subtopics that we have discussed and covered throughout the day. I would like to call on the Honorable Shamata, a Minister of Agriculture, Revolutionary Government of Zanzibar, as well as the retired General James Kabarebe, Minister of State, Regional Integration from the Republic of Rwanda. Joining him as well is retired Honorable Gataga, the Right Honorable, I beg your pardon, Gataga, First Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of EAC Affairs from the Republic of Uganda. And of course, His Excellency Prosper Dodiko, Minister of Environment, Agriculture, and Livestock from the Republic of Burundi. Honorable ministers, if you can join me on stage as we listen in to your interventions and transition into the EAC regional position towards COP28. And after that, we will officially launch the report to the delegates here and finally wrap up the session with a brief way forward from the EAC Secretariat. So once again, His Excellency Prosper Dodiko, Minister of Environment, Agriculture and Livestock from the Republic of Burundi, kindly make your way up on stage. And you'll also be joined by Right Honorable Kadaga, First Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for EAC Affairs from the Republic of Uganda. I understand also retired General James Kabarebe, Minister of State, Regional Integration from the Republic of Rwanda, also make your way up on stage as well. And I believe the ambassador of the DRC to the United Republic of Tanzania is also with us. Kindly make your way up on stage as we listen in to the ministerial interventions and then finally launch the EAC regional position towards a COP28. Thank you so much for indulging us. Karibu sana. And we'll begin with His Excellency Prosper Dodiko. If you may address the gathering with your final interventions from today. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais vous demander de prendre les casques pour la traduction, parce que je vais parler en France. I ask you to take the mask because I will speak in French. Merci beaucoup. Nous avons noté avec attention et importance les interventions qui ont eu lieu ce matin avec les différents orateurs. Comme vous le savez, ce matin, nous avons eu l'occasion de présenter les résultats attendus de ce sommet et en regardant les interventions qui ont eu lieu, on peut affirmer que nous sommes dans la bonne voie vers l'atteinte de nos objectifs. Comme vous le savez, le dernier résultat, c'était d'avoir une position commune que la région va prendre au moment de la COP28. Mais avant d'arriver là-bas, on peut résumer en disant ceci. Quand on parle de l'environnement, on peut résumer en disant que nous parlons de la couverture du sol. Quand le sol est bien couvert, on peut affirmer que cela va de pair avec la protection de l'environnement. Nous parlons de changement climatique. Quand on parle de changement climatique, on entend les deux extrêmes. Le premier extrême, c'est d'abord le manque d'eau qui entraîne des sécheresses. Et deux, nous avons l'eau qui est à la hauteur qui dépasse les besoins, c'est-à-dire les inondations. Alors, voilà les deux éléments extrêmes qui expliquent le changement climatique. Et chacun de ces deux éléments a des impacts, des effets et des impacts. Et si on parle du manque d'eau, j'ai été très content que l'un des orateurs a parlé de la collecte et de la conservation des eaux de pluie. Nous avons la chance que dans la région, nous avons des pluies abondantes. L'autre a parlé de l'existence du lac Kivu, du lac Victoria plutôt, du lac Tanganyika et même le Nil. Non seulement que nous avons de l'eau en suffisance dans la région, mais aussi nous avons des pluies abondantes. Est-ce que nous valorisons ces deux ressources à juste valeur? Nous avons longtemps parlé des changements climatiques, nous savons les actions nécessaires, les mécanismes de financement sont bien connus, et qu'est-ce qui nous empêche d'avancer vers la mise en œuvre des actions concrètes? Je pense qu'un des éléments qui nous bloque, c'est d'abord la non-maîtrise de ces mécanismes de financement. Et si on ne travaille pas beaucoup sur cet aspect, nous resterons toujours dans les paroles. Ça, c'est le premier élément. Deuxième élément, c'est cette bonne habitude de partager les expériences réussies dans la région pour lutter contre le changement climatique. Non seulement les actions qu'il faut mener, mais aussi il faut partir de la base, c'est-à-dire la recherche. Nous devons renforcer la collaboration autour de la recherche pour mettre en place des technologies, des actions innovantes qui nous permettent de lutter contre le changement climatique. Nous avons des forêts. Est-ce que nous connaissons la valeur de nos ressources? Et vous savez que c'est un grand travail à faire. J'ai demandé à un ami, est-ce que vous maîtrisez le crédit carbone de votre forêt? La réponse, c'est toujours non. Et donc, il y a un travail scientifique qui doit être mené pour d'abord, connaître nos ressources et de voir, comment les protéger et deux, comment les valoriser. Et donc, j'espère que ce sommet va nous permettre de jeter des bases, non seulement pour avoir une vision commune, mais surtout faire une synergie dans la recherche, dans le partage des actions réussies et surtout comment réussir la mobilisation des financements tout en incluant, tout en donnant une place importante au secteur privé. Et je pense que dans le moment à venir, nous allons avoir des propositions pour avoir une position commune que la région devrait mener à la COP 28. Mais avant, on peut déjà affirmer que nous sommes dans la bonne voie parce que les interventions ont mis en évidence les actions nécessaires. Je vous remercie.
Thank you for your intervention. That is the chair of the Sectoral Council of Environment and Natural Resources Management, the Minister for Environment from the Republic of Burundi, His Excellency Prosper Dodeko. At this juncture, allow me to invite retired General James Kabarebe, Minister of State and Regional Integration from the Republic of Rwanda. The floor is yours.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank the ESC community for bringing us together today for this important side event on climate change and food security, two global crises that are affecting sustainable development and also claim lives. In May this year, devastating floods and landslides took the lives of 135 Rwandans and left thousands homeless. Many countries are experiencing similar tragedies, reminding us that we are at a critical moment. The time for discussions is over, and we must take decisive solutions-oriented action. As we reflect and share best practices today, there is a need to focus on three critical issues: the energy we use for cooking, post-harvest handling, and building climate-resilient settlements. On the first one, since our region still relies heavily on the use of wood and charcoal for cooking, the most valuable solution countries can provide is to harness solar energy to protect our forests. By investing in affordable solar solutions for cooking, we can reduce deforestation and improve people's health and quality of life. Secondly, we must prevent post-harvest losses. Studies have shown us that 40% of food harvested is lost due to poor post-harvest facilities. In this regard, the African Center of Excellence for Sustainable Cooling and Cold Chain, headquartered in Rwanda, represents a practical approach to addressing post-harvest losses and improving food security. This center makes affordable cold chains a reality by meeting the real needs of smallholder farmers and providing tailored cooling technology that work. Lastly, we must promote climate-resilient settlements. This is why Rwanda launched Rwanda Green Village Program, one of several initiatives within EAC aimed at providing citizens currently living in high-risk areas with the amenities and services they need to build prosperous lives. As I conclude, all of us together have a role to play in changing the way food is produced, distributed, and consumed to promote healthier populations, societies, and economies, and protect our planet. Rwanda remains committed to work with all of you towards a green and climate resilient future. I thank you all for your attention.
Thank you so much, retired General James Kabarebe, Minister for State Regional Integration, and of course, Republic of Rwanda represented well in your speech. At this point, I'd like to invite Right Honorable Kadaga, First Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for EAC Affairs from the Republic of Uganda. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, moderator. Good afternoon, the participants. It's a pleasure to be here today, to be able to attend the high-level forum on climate change and food security and environmental sustainability. Obviously, a lot has been said already, but just to re-emphasize that climate change is manifested by increased frequency and intensity of extreme events due to rising temperatures and erratic rainfall. This continues to impact ecosystems, disrupting their integrity and functions. Listening this morning, I was reminded that the heads of state of the East African community agreed to establish meteorological authorities throughout the partner states. So I was asking myself, do we even share information, or we concentrate on our borders? Because sharing this information would assist in some ways to alert one another, because we need an early warning system. I was also thinking about the utilization of our natural resources. Of course, we heard about the River Nile. It discharges 7,000 cubic meters of water every second. What are we doing with it? I know that Egypt, since time immemorial, has used the River Nile for irrigation. The rest of us just watch the Nile and are happy that it's part of our topography. We have not addressed the great massive water of the River Congo, which discharges 41,000 cubic meters of water every second. What are we doing with it? It's just going to the Atlantic. But we could harness it to handle the issue of irrigation, which has been pointed out as at a low level on this continent. We also need to address the issue of storage. Many times there is drought in one part of the region, plenty in another part, but how do we share the output? All these are important, and I think we should, if we're really thinking as a bloc, we should begin to think and plan together, not just as our small countries. We also need to look at the homes, the issue of availability of food, access to it, the quality, the stability, how often can people afford to eat, and how long. All these are areas that I think we need to look at as we plan for COP22. So I want to thank you very much for the information that has been presented here. Definitely it will assist us in further planning so that we can improve the welfare of our people. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much from our Council of Ministers who have given their interventions. We're about to hear from the EAC on the way forward and a few recommendations before we officially launch the EAC regional position towards COP28. Allow me to introduce Jean-Baptiste Havugimana, who will give us the recommendations from the EAC. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you, MC. Honorable ministers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we have a position that will be taken to the United Nations Climate Change Convention, the COP28 in Dubai. And this is a single position that has been agreed upon by all the 7 EAC partner states. It covers 14 messages, which actually reflect the real situation priorities from the partner states. And priorities that if they are implemented, because it will take 1 year after this COP, the upcoming COP, to the next one for implementation of whatever resolutions we have been taking based on those priorities. Honorable ministers and distinguished guests, there are 14 messages with a bit of details. And without too much ado and taking you through all those details, honorable ministers, we have came up with a dummy report that you would wish honorables to launch. Then from there we move forward to implement. This will be part of the negotiations during the COP28 in Dubai. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean-Baptiste. At this juncture, I'll request for our Council of Ministers to please rise and take center stage as we take a photo and officially launch the EAC regional position towards COP28. Kindly make your way center stage as we officially launch the report, which is the joint EAC regional position ahead of COP28. This, of course, gives the EAC an opportunity to showcase the milestones, achievements, and the lessons learned from the implementation of climate change programs here in the region. Thank you so much, honorable ministers, for indulging us as we commemorate this occasion. Wonderful. You can take center stage. Photographers, come up to capture the moment as well. And this has been a journey of deliberations between the EAC and the Secretariat, partner states, and development partners on the progress in the implementation of the Paris Agreement, the Africa Climate Summit declarations, as well as the Food Security Summit resolutions. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Can we get a round of applause for the official launch of the regional EAC position? Thank you once again. Honorable ministers, you may take your seats. Thank you so much for your indulgence and your time as well. Wonderful. At this stage, distinguished guests, delegates, thank you for your time and keeping us company up until this point. It is now 2:34. We are wrapping up officially the first segment of this high-level engagement as we transition to lunch. I understand lunch will be served downstairs. We'll have team members from the EAC to guide you downstairs where lunch will be served. We will reconvene back here in plenary in about an hour's time as we await the arrival of the heads of state. Once again, thank you so much for your insights and for your presence as well. Enjoy lunch, and we'll reconvene here in an hour. Thank you so much. Downstairs for lunch. Kindly allow for their exit, after which our participants can also follow. Thank you. One more kind request. We'll have a final photo op with the keynote speakers and panelists just outside. Members of the Fourth Estate photographers, kindly set up at the stairs just outside. We have one more photo op for our keynote speakers, panelists, and honorable ministers as well present. Kindly make your way to the stairs just outside. Members of the Fourth Estate photographers, kindly position yourselves to capture that photograph. Thank you once again.